Tonight at 10, a growing and ageing population and the NHS under exceptional pressure. The second of our special reports from the Royal Blackburn Hospital, where they confront a lack of beds on a daily basis.
Ready for the surgery?
It just seems to be the bed that's the problem.
Yeah, it's the beds that's the problem.
And as demand soars, the hospital boss says that better care for the elderly is the key to relieving pressure.
You don't want to be in hospital if you don't need to be in hospital. I would far rather have capacity in the community in terms of nursing homes and care homes.
And a new report says that health funding in England will struggle to keep pace with demand. Also tonight, the Brexit bill makes progress and MPs are told they'll be given a take-it-or-leave-it vote on the final Brexit deal. An appeal court is told that a former Royal Marine convicted of murdering a wounded Taliban fighter in Afghanistan was mentally ill at the time. And it's the robot challenge. Can jobs be protected when automation takes over?
In the South, council climb down. Surrey abandons plans for a 15% hike in council tax, but residents still face a big rise. And the man who survived a mass shooting in Norway warns students in Hampshire about the dangers of extremism.
Good evening. We start tonight with the second of our special reports on the state of the NHS in England as it struggles to cope with ever-rising demand. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has warned that spending on health is unlikely to rise sufficiently to cope with the demands of a growing and ageing population. We'll have more on that in a moment after our special correspondent Ed Thomas reports from the Royal Blackburn Hospital, which was built originally to serve a population of some 300,000 people, but is now serving more than 500,000.
Every bed on every ward.
You never know what's coming through the door. Never.
Lives depending on the NHS.
I wouldn't have been here today, but for them.
For a week, the BBC was allowed inside the Royal Blackburn Hospital. A rare opportunity to see the everyday pressures.
It's a fight today for the beds.
Monday morning, the medical wards and A&E are full.
If that laser goes there, then we can give that vascular bed back. Yeah, giving it.
But an intensive care space must be found.
So that gives one bed on the unit.
Operations are planned and patients need to recover here.
Get that bed turned round as quickly as possible because that's going to be our only bed. We didn't get up this morning to think we're going to ruin somebody's life by telling them that they can't have their operation. We're trying to juggle the beds. It's a case of sometimes the staff laugh at me because I do walk up and down the unit like this and I go, we're still spinning. At some point today, the plates won't crash and we will have enough beds for everybody. And that's the same today. Hopefully today we will have enough beds for everybody.
Right now, this means patients are waiting. Stephen has elective surgery for throat cancer. He's been told if no recovery beds are available...
I'm in limbo, really.
...it might be cancelled.
Hoping it's going to be today, because it's obviously with the cancer, you've got to get it out as fast as.
Across the week, staff talked about the challenges of finding beds. In theatre, vascular surgeon Robert Salomon gets a call from the A&E.
So I'm trying to sew quickly because I'm leaving downstairs.
On his mind, beds.
Having your hand on someone's aorta is what you do. But having to do that and have phone calls of someone else going off and someone wants you on the ward and you've got another patient to do and you don't know if you've got a bed, that's the thing that stresses you.
Minutes later...
He's come into hospital with pain in his abdomen and his blood pressure's gone down.
He's on his way to the emergency department.
Someone with an aneurysm.
Ronald Phillipson. He's 84 and has collapsed. Another elderly patient with an acute complex condition. Another family desperate.
How important is this place to you?
Lifeline.
A lifeline, because her mother, Ronald's wife, has been admitted on the same day. Upstairs, waiting for an operation, Betty has type 2 diabetes. She's been told she could lose her foot, and with it, her independence.
So you're waiting for your operation and you're worried about your husband and...
Well, that's it, yeah, because he's blind and deaf. He can't do anything for himself at all.
But you've got to concentrate on your operation, haven't you?
Oh, I can't concentrate on that until I know he's all right. I don't particularly want the my foot gone and my leg because I won't be able to stay at home. I won't be able to walk. They'll have to put me in a nursing home. And I'm not going in a nursing home by my husband. But that's not what happened, is it? They'll put us in 2 different places.
I'm getting straight down on the bone there, OK?
But this is the reality of the NHS today. Increasing demands inside and outside the hospital.
It's not just Betty I'm worried about, it's her husband as well. They've been with each other for over 50 years. They codepend on each other. It's just dreadful. If you look at bed capacity cost for management of patients with ulcers, it's enormous.
Type 2 diabetes.
Type 2 diabetes, it's just, I can't even convey what a serious problem it is to society, the NHS and us in the front line.
And this is what the front line looks like. The Davenports waiting 6 hours in A&E.
Ready for the surgery.
It just seems to be the bed that's the problem.
Yeah, it's the beds that's the problem.
On the medical wards, unfortunately, we have used every possible bed available.
Daily meetings to find beds.
Get some more fluids.
Yeah. Senior nurses trying to move people through the hospital.
Females aren't moving off here. There's no female beds in the hospital at the minute.
And some surgeons and nurses left upset and frustrated.
Every year we've had to make efficiency savings, and most people are feeling like there's not a lot of fat left on the bone anymore, and we still don't have enough to do what we need to do.
There's not enough staff. There's too many patients coming in and out of hospital. It's, you know, a number of things. So we all go home deflated and upset because we feel that we can't do any more than we're doing. Sit up a little bit, sweetheart.
The chief executive here wanted to show this pressure for beds and the need for solutions outside his hospital.
We are trying to support staff by looking at the bed capacity that we have, by trying to work with partners to keep people out of hospital where they don't need to be in hospital.
Would you rather have another ward being built or a care home in the community?
It has to be a care home in the community. You don't want to be in hospital if you don't need to be in hospital. I would far rather have capacity in the community in terms of nursing homes and care homes.
Coming in this way, young man.
Everyone here is treated. No one is turned away.
Ready, steady and roll.
Betty's operation was a success and she'll move into a care home this week. But not alone. She'll be reunited with her husband Ronald. And this is the moment a bed was found and Stephen got his cancer operation.
Mr. Bradbury, they'll be coming for you to theatre in the next 5 minutes.
They are. What about that? It couldn't have been timed better.
All right, you ready?
They are.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Life.
Poof.
Inside the Royal Blackburn Hospital. Thomas, BBC News.
Well, the pressure being exerted on the NHS by the demands of an ageing population was underlined today by the latest analysis from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It said that although NHS funding by 2020 would be higher than it was before the financial crash, it would still fail to keep pace with population growth and ageing. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, is here with me with his analysis.
Well, Hugh, does the NHS need a lot more money? The government says it's given the service in England what it needs. How much responsibility do we have as patients to avoid lifestyle-related diseases? Could there be a more efficient use of resources? There are many questions in the search for long-term solutions.
Healthcare is all about looking after the changing needs of the population. It's growing and people are living longer. There are big demographic changes. Those are challenges facing the NHS in the nations of the UK and health systems in leading economies around the world.
New analysis from the Institute for Fiscal Studies illustrates the problem. Health spending in England, after allowing for inflation, has gone up for the last few years. On current plans, it carries on rising, though it tails off a bit in a couple of years' time. But spending per person, adjusted for the changing age profile of the population, has risen more slowly. And by 2020, it'll actually have fallen back. And that'll leave a £1.3 billion shortfall on what's needed just to get back to where it was in 2010.
Health spending is rising, but the population's getting bigger, quite a bit bigger, and the population's getting older. Once you take account of the size and age of the population, actually health spending per person, taking account of their age, will be a little bit lower by the end of this Parliament than it was back in 2010, something we've never seen before.
The challenge of an ageing population with more complex health needs was illustrated by the head of NHS England, Simon Stevens. He said 1 million more over 75s are being treated now than there were 5 years ago, and in 5 years' time we'll be looking after another million. While healthcare spending in England rose by 9% since the 2009-10 year, more than in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, adult social care was cut by 6.4% over that time, a bigger reduction than in other parts of the UK. That's affected the elderly population, which puts more pressure on the NHS.
But some argue it's about more than money, and there need to be new ways of working in health and social care, as well as more efficient management in hospitals and across the NHS.
There's huge variations in the way care is offered, in the amount of medical care offered, for example, and in the outcomes of care for patients. So that is the area now to focus a lot more attention, and that's out with any funding level.
Lifestyle-related health conditions are another challenge. Schemes like this help children learn about exercise and diet. A government minister today said the UK was addicted to sugar, with children among the highest consumers in Europe. The cost of treating type 2 diabetes and related complications is nearly 10% of the NHS budget.
So prevention as well as cure has to be part of the long-term answer, or the NHS could come under such strain that the whole system becomes unsustainable. That's just a sketch of some of the challenges. There's lots more data, analysis and detail on our website, bbc.co.uk/health. Hugh.
Many thanks to you. Our health editor, Hugh Pym there. Well, MPs at Westminster will be given a vote on the government's Brexit deal before it is finalised by the European Union. The announcement was seen today by some as a major concession, until ministers pointed out that if MPs rejected that final deal, there'd be no renegotiation and Britain would then leave the EU without a deal. Our political correspondent Carol Walker has more details.
How much say will Parliament have as the government negotiates our departure from the EU?
Order.
More than 7 hours of debate began with what some saw as a concession from the government.
I can confirm that the government will bring forward a motion on the final agreement to be approved by both Houses of Parliament before it's concluded, and we expect and intend that this will happen before the European Parliament debates and votes on the final agreement. I hope that's of assistance.
But Theresa May's negotiations with other EU leaders are likely to be difficult and complex, and some MPs are worried about her threat to leave without a deal if she doesn't get her way.
What the House wants is the opportunity to send the government back to our EU partners to negotiate a deal if one hasn't been reached.
I can't think of a greater signal of weakness than for this House to send the government back to the European Union and to say we want to negotiate further. I think that would be seized upon as a sign of weakness.
So the choice for MPs on any deal would effectively be take it or leave it.
If you just wait until everything's hands have been shaken with all the other Europeans and then you come here, then it means Parliament is told if you reject it, of course you have nothing.
This is about this House having a genuine choice at some stage and looking at what the government has negotiated and then be able to say yes or no without that sword of Damocles, that bad deal or no deal, which was the threat from the Prime Minister.
And some were concerned about the whole tone of the debate.
I feel sometimes I'm sitting along with colleagues who are like jihadis in their support for a hard Brexit. No Brexit is hard enough. Be gone, you evil Europeans. We never want you to darken our doors again.
The Prime Minister sought to persuade wavering MPs as they went to vote. In the end, just 7 Tories rebelled on the key amendment.
The ayes to the right, 293. The noes to the left, 326.
A comfortable majority for the government, and ministers hope that will curb potential rebellions in the Lords. The government hopes to get its bill through the Commons tomorrow night, and the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has ordered his MPs to back the legislation. But that's already resulted in 3 resignations from his shadow cabinet, and there could be more to come. More votes lie ahead, but tonight the government is confident it will get the backing of Parliament to begin the formal Brexit negotiations as planned by the end of March. Carol Walker, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the Scottish Parliament has voted by 90 to 34 against plans to leave the EU. In last year's referendum, a majority of Scottish voters wanted to remain. The motion passed today, had been put forward by the Scottish Government, but the UK Supreme Court has already ruled that there is no legal requirement to consult the devolved administrations before the Brexit process can start. So let's talk to our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, who's at Holyrood. Sarah, if this isn't legally binding, as we know it's not, why does the First Minister say it's one of the most important votes in the history of the Scottish Parliament?
Well, because even though the Scottish Parliament can't prevent or delay the triggering of Article 50, the SNP still think this is highly significant because they believe it will now be harder for the Prime Minister to ignore their demands for a different Brexit settlement for Scotland, now that MSPs have voted 3-1 against the UK government's plans. The Scottish Government wants Scotland to be able to stay in the EU single market even after the rest of the UK leaves, but they're becoming deeply frustrated because they think the Prime Minister is not giving their proposals really serious consideration. They were repeating that today, and then Labour and the Tories accused them of trying to stoke up grievances against Westminster just to further their agenda for Scottish independence. But the Scottish Brexit Minister, Mike Russell, said that the clock is ticking and time is running out to try and agree a UK-wide approach to the Brexit negotiations before the end of March, when the government triggers Article 50.
All right, Sarah, thanks very much again. Sarah Smith, our Scotland editor there at Holyrood. Lawyers acting for a Royal Marine who was given a life sentence for shooting dead an injured Afghan insurgent have argued that he was suffering from a mental illness at the time. Sergeant Alexander Blackman, described as a superb soldier, has started a new appeal against his conviction in 2013. A video recording of the shooting was shown in court today, as our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale tells us.
This video shows the moment an Apache helicopter opens fire on Taliban insurgents. All filmed by one of the Marines on patrol, who wait and then cheer. Sergeant Blackman's defence team called it a tough tour in an austere place, Helmand. In their words, a breeding ground for mental health problems. We can only show what happened before the insurgent was killed. Sergeant Blackman and one of his patrol cautiously approached the wounded man. The court refused an application by the BBC to release the next clips, in which he's dragged across the field and then shot. In 2013, a military court found Alexander Blackman, also known as Marine A, guilty of murder. Today, his wife arrived at court at the start of a fresh appeal to have that sentence quashed and substituted with manslaughter instead. Blackman himself listened to the proceedings by video link from the Wiltshire prison, where he's serving an 8-year sentence. His new defence team argued to a panel of judges that he was mentally ill at the time. In court, Blackman was described as very reserved, a John Wayne-like character who downplayed his mental health problems at the time of his original trial. But giving evidence, 3 psychiatrists said he was in fact suffering from an adjustment disorder that impaired his ability to make rational judgments and that led to a loss of self-control when he shot the insurgent.
Anybody want to do first aid on this idiot? Nope.
No. But are these the words of a man who didn't fully comprehend what he was doing? And then this.
Yeah, I'll shuffle off this mortal coil. Nothing you would do to us.
I know.
Exactly. All right. Obviously, this doesn't go anywhere, fellas.
Yeah, roger, mate.
I've just broken the convention.
Yeah, roger. The prosecution argued that Blackman was in control of his actions, even making sure he was out of sight of the helicopter above before he fired the fatal shot. Marine A's supporters will be back tomorrow to hear more evidence, but his defence will have to prove that his symptoms were substantial and significant if he's to have his murder conviction quashed. Jonathan Beale, BBC News, at the Royal Courts of Justice.
The housing market in England is broken and needs fixing. That was the message from ministers today, as they announced new plans to meet a target of building 1 million new homes by 2020. The new strategy includes putting more pressure on councils to plan for local housing needs and a new fund for first-time buyers. Labour says the measures are feeble beyond belief. From Manchester, our home editor Mark Easton sent this report.
This part of England could be seen as a testbed for central government's housing ambitions. Local councils recently produced a joint plan for the new homes they say must be delivered if Greater Manchester is to become the engine for a northern powerhouse. Creating the jobs that will drive the growth will need, councils estimate, another 227,000 homes in the next 20 years, some on Greater Manchester's Greenbelt. The ink was barely dry on the draft plan before the protests began. Demonstrations have been held across the region in recent weeks. At least 9 of the local MPs, both Labour and Tory, have come out against the proposals. Today's white paper demands councils come up with realistic plans for delivering the houses their area needs.
3 for this side and 4 that side.
But these campaigners don't think Greater Manchester's plan is realistic in the slightest. The campaign to save Bury's Greenbelt is adamant the proposal to turn farmland into a new residential community is based on faulty logic.
I know we need housing, but use the brownfield first. There's 11,000 empty homes in Greater Manchester. Get them filled up and then start looking at greenfield.
But those looking to restore Greater Manchester's industrial greatness say it can't grow unless it builds.
We are not in the business of tearing up the Greenbelt. We believe that we have looked at the brownfield land supply all across the conurbation and that we cannot accommodate our growth without taking a small part of green land into account as part of the future development of the city region.
And people like Gerard Saint-Etienne, who struggles to pay his rent, never mind get on Greater Manchester's housing ladder, says a realistic plan from his point of view means an affordable home in a prosperous city.
I'd like to see them put people before profit, so I'd like it to be more obtainable for like the working man, because it seems to be like the working man's been pushed aside.
The government says affordability is at the heart of its strategy, both with homes for rent and to buy. But will developers deliver?
We know that Greater Manchester needs around about 4,800 new affordable homes every year. In the past, the area has been delivering around 2,000. So we know there's a big demand for affordable housing out there. And as an industry, we're keen to meet that demand through appropriate development.
Today's white paper promises radical action to mend England's broken housing market. But when it comes to a realistic plan to deliver enough affordable homes where people want to live, there are questions as to whether that can be done without some development on the Greenbelt. Now, central government has decided to dodge that fight, but here in Greater Manchester, it's game on.
They'll go ballistic, they just won't accept it.
In High Lane near Stockport, locals are preparing for battle, determined to halt plans for new houses in their village. People think you're NIMBYs, you know that.
Well, they can think whatever they want. We're not NIMBYs, we're not opposed to new housing, but we need it to be done in a balanced and structured way and using brownfield.
But you don't want it in your
first.
backyard.
No, well, no, I'm not. No, we're not saying. I'm not saying we don't want new houses in High Lane. We do, but we don't want mass development.
The fight over Greater Manchester's plan is destined to end up with the Secretary of State in London. Ministers today spoke of the need for radical action to deal with housing need. But are the Tories ready to defy the passionate concerns of their natural supporters trying to protect England's countryside? Mark Easton, BBC News, Greater Manchester.
So let's have a brief look at some of the day's other news stories now. A passenger has been arrested after a flight from Pakistan was intercepted by RAF jets and diverted from Heathrow to Stansted Airport. The Typhoon planes were scrambled following an anonymous phone call. Police say that the incident was not terror-related. At least 19 people have been killed in the Afghan capital, Kabul, after a suicide bomber targeted the Supreme Court building. It's the second attack on a government institution in under a month. A Taliban spokesperson said that the group was responsible for the attack. Donald Trump's controversial choice for Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has been confirmed in post by the US Senate, but only after Vice President Mike Pence had to cast a deciding vote, and it is the first time that a Vice President has been required to break the deadlock in Senate over a US cabinet nomination. Commons Speaker John Bercow has been defending his position after saying that President Trump should not be allowed to speak to Parliament on his state visit later this year. He's been criticised by a number of Conservative MPs who say that he's damaged the neutrality of his post. Now, in France, the leader of the far-right Front National, Marine Le Pen, seems to be gaining support in some of the latest opinion polls in the presidential race. She advocates strict controls on immigration and she wants to redefine France's relationship with the European Union. France's finance minister said today that Marine Le Pen would never be installed in the Élysée Palace by the people of France, but her team says that that is precisely the kind of elitist talk which boosts her levels of support. Our correspondent Lucy Williamson has been to the old steelworking town of Éanges in northeastern France to test her appeal among working-class voters.
Éanges is not a place given to metaphors, but memories. The relics of its shuttered steel furnaces stand sentry to a new political age. Communists and socialists used to run this place together, but unemployment here has soared by 75% in the past decade, and in its wake has come the Front National.
I'm for the Front National. I'm not afraid to say it. I'm not happy with today's politics. There's too much immigration. We give to everyone. That's why you chose Brexit, and I absolutely approve of that.
In 2010, the Socialists won almost 60% of the vote here in the regional runoff. 5 years later, it was down to 19%. Votes for the FN over the same period more than doubled, putting them in the lead. Éanges now has an FN mayor, himself once a union man from the far left. The party presents itself as defending France's forgotten ones against crime, immigration and economic change.
The left betrayed its voters, the workers, the middle class, the shop owners. There is mass immigration and we can't welcome the poor from across the world. We have to stop it and take care of our own.
Patrice was one of the FN's new converts, recruited as a deputy to the mayor. Within a year, he'd left, disillusioned, he says, by its repressive, xenophobic views. He's voting far left in the presidential elections.
I was attracted because the other parties don't listen to the people, and I believed that the FN was listening to me. I think Marine Le Pen might have a chance because what's happening at a national level has already happened here. FN voters vote, the others don't because they're so disgusted with politics.
During his presidential campaign 5 years ago, François Hollande came to this area and promised that the blast furnaces wouldn't close. They did. With faith in the Socialist Party already dwindling here, many voters moved their support to the political margins, to the far left and to the far right. One relic that survived here is the boxing club, a place for young men to teach themselves how to win and lose. In the ring, it's easy to judge promises against performance. In politics, it's often performance that loses elections and promises that win. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Éanges.
The rise of the robot and the impact of automation on human workers is fast becoming one of the biggest challenges for policymakers. One report this week warned that nearly 250,000 public sector workers could be replaced by robots or computers over the next 15 years. Our technology correspondent, Rory Ketton-Jones, gained exclusive access to one firm where the robots are doing more and more.
In a warehouse in Hatfield, a very complex operation is underway, assembling Ocado customer orders from 50,000 potential items. It still requires plenty of people, but if the online supermarket is to make money from something shoppers used to do themselves, this must get ever more automated. That's why there's a robotics lab in the corner of the warehouse. This robot arm, designed to pick up fruit without damaging it, is one of their creations, though it's some years away from being put to work. But in another warehouse in Andover, Ocado says the future is already here. Swarms of robots move across a grid, collaborating to collect groceries from crates beneath them. It's a huge investment, but the firm says there's no alternative.
If the UK is to remain competitive on a world stage, then there is no option but to invest in not only automation, but in this increasing move towards robotics, because that is the only way that we will be competitive. There is no choice.
All kinds of businesses that want to prosper over the next decade are going to have to use artificial intelligence and automation to make themselves more efficient. The question is just how many people are going to see their jobs taken by robots and what's going to happen to them.
At London's Science Museum, a new exhibition traces the history of robots and shows how they're now encroaching on tasks once restricted to humans. One academic has a startling forecast.
35% of current UK employment is at high risk of being replaced by a robot or similar technology by the year 2030. Truck drivers, taxi drivers, processing of things like invoices.
But there's a more optimistic view that our jobs are becoming more creative and complex and we'll be able to keep ahead of the robots.
Some of the best skills you can have are adaptability, ability to switch between tasks, emotional intelligence and the ability to deal with change. Those kind of things should protect our children for the labour market of tomorrow, whichever direction the robots take.
The lesson of the past is that new technology usually creates more jobs than it destroys, but along the way a lot of people can end up losing out. Rory Catlin-Jones, BBC News.
Quick reminder that Newsnight's coming up on BBC Two. Here's Emily.
Not everyone gets rent-free accommodation in a prime central London location, a skip away from work. Tonight, Newsnight's dedicated to housing. How bad is the problem? Is there a real solution? Join us now on BBC Two.
So that's Newsnight with Emily here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.